Okay, let me finish up the puzzle, Basil, before we get started on the second show. We've got the Sunday morning puzzle, so let's get that in gear. Okay, you can help me with it if you'd like. You're pretty good at this. Okay, I have one clue here. It's actually one across. Purchaser's book. Purchaser's book. Okay, it's 7 letters long. Okay, so it's a book that purchasers might use. Okay, yep, Basil, yeah. Let's put that in there and see if it works. Catalog. Okay, I think that seems to make sense. Okay, 1 down. Okay, the clue is Polynesian sailing boat. And we know it starts with a C. If catalog is in fact correct, it starts with a C. Okay. Basil says, yeah, okay. It's, I don't want to leave you in the dark on that, even though you can see pretty well in the dark. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 letters long. Basil said he was just messing with me. He said he knew it. Catamaran. Let's fill that in and see if it, okay, yeah, it fits. Catamaran, C-A-T-A-M-A-R-A-N. Okay, good. Okay, let's go to 5 across. And, well, this one you'll get pretty easily, I think. It's a fill-in-the-blank one. Raining, blanks, and dogs. Okay, yeah, cats, okay. I didn't even have to tell you how many letters. Yep, 4 letters, cats. Okay. Now 5 down. No, not 5 down. No. I like to go a little kind of across and do it that way. So let's go to 10 across. And this is a little bit close to, you become more familiar with the Chinese people in that part of the world, and the Tibetan situation, but I'm going to veer a little bit away from there. The clue is Indian Raj, and I know it has to be from India because of the word Raj, and it's 4 letters long. Basil said, no, Basil, cats, not cats again. Okay, 4 letters long. I'm gonna go right in there, Basil. I don't think you know the answer to that, although you're kind of giving me a wink. Okay, I'm gonna try the word rule. R-U-L-E. His whiskers are really going now. And the right ear, it's a twitching away. Okay, but we have to go on. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be today's host. And with us we have a fellow by the name of Basil BuddhaCat. Basil recently started up a TV show on Comcast called Basil BuddhaCat Presents. It's shown Friday evening, 10 p.m. Oh, Basil, I'm sorry. Basil corrected me. I'm sorry. Friday evening, 7 p.m. And also, Basil's show is on, you better correct me before I even say this. Okay. Basil's got a Sunday morning show that goes from 10:30 to 11, and Basil wanted that time slot because Basil considers himself to be, and he and I have plenty of discussions and know each other pretty well to know that we're both very much on the same page with this. Basil considers himself to be religiously a devout Christian, and he considers himself to be philosophically a Buddhist. Ergo, Basil BuddhaCat. That's where he chose his surname from. Now, Basil's show has had a number of guests on so far. He started off with a tough one. He started off with Michelle Bachmann, who came on the show. And would like to talk a little bit about your interview with Michelle Bachmann? I mean, I was there, but I mean, what's your take on it? How did it go? Okay, Basil says that she was a good sport. She didn't seem to mind him talking about some faux pas, some errors that she had made on the campaign trail in some of her stops, or stop in Iowa, for instance, where she went to a little town in Iowa and was glad to meet the people, as she said it, people that lived in the town where John Wayne was born. And in fact, the town in Iowa was not the birthplace of John Wayne. It was the birthplace of John Wayne Gacy. And that was a bit of a flump on her part. And Basil noted that, and Basil says that she's kind of, during the CPAC convention, she's kind of making a little fun of herself about that because she doesn't see it as a major issue that she would not have someone on her campaign correcting her and prepping her for a visit to a town. But Basil says the more important one that he noted was when she went to New Hampshire to campaign, and she was in Concord, New Hampshire, that in fact she noted that Concord, New Hampshire was the birthplace of the American Revolution. That in fact the shot heard round the world, as it's called, that it was fired in Concord, New Hampshire, when in fact, of course, as the folks in Concord, New Hampshire, hopefully most of them know, it was actually Concord, Massachusetts, where the shot heard around the world, where the first shots were fired in the American Revolution, where the British troops marched into the area, and a little bit of guerrilla warfare. Yes, it's called guerrilla warfare. Okay, you see things catch and get credit for that too. But yeah, a little bit of guerrilla warfare took place where the colonists fired from behind trees, behind cover at the British, and then before the British could get them, they snuck away. They let it be known that they were going to assemble an army, that they were going to fight against the British, and they were going to, in fact, take the 13 colonies out from under the rule of King George, and we're going to take it and form their own country and chase the British out because they weren't happy with a lot of things that just weren't happy with the country thousands of miles away ruling them. Now, Basil, you made a note in some of our shows about some of your shows. Yes, okay, some of your shows about another person that came to be known as King George, who marched the United States into a country called Iraq, and in fact, under a provisional governor or two or three or four, ruled the country of Iraq for nearly 10 years, and only by the graces of the Iraqi people, first of all, telling America that they wanted us to leave by a date certain, and then President Obama living up to that request from the Iraqi government, that the United States no longer has direct military involvement in Iraq. Now, yes, you're right. Okay, as not only Basil but his second guest on his second pair of shows, Ron Paul noted there still is some serious United States involvement in Iraq, not direct military involvement, but also taking care of what's called the Emerald City, which was the green zone, which was built at the cost of some many millions of dollars, and became the largest embassy, in fact, in the world. And Basil says that the day that we hand that embassy over to the Iraqi people and settle on a much smaller embassy in their country, then Basil will believe that we've done our part in actually removing ourselves from the Iraq conflict. And Ron Paul made a careful note of that too. Basil and Ron had a great discussion. I should say Congressman Paul from Texas, who's a libertarian, who is a little different than your modern-day traditional Republican, either the neoconservative branch or the Tea Party branch, or the more traditional branch, which we made note of on Basil's show about Mitt Romney. Seems to have the more traditional Republicans who are interested, in fact, in winning, and not at any cost, but winning the race and not putting forth what Mr. Romney termed a crazy candidate who can't win. And I don't think he was referring to Ron Paul as much as he was referring to Mr. Gingrich at the time. But at any rate, so Basil and Ron Paul, Congressman Paul, agreed on a lot of important international subjects that in fact we should not have direct involvement in either Iraq or Afghanistan. That in fact the war in Afghanistan, as Basil notes, is also 10 years old, 11 years old now, and in fact is a lost war. It's a lost cause in his mind's eye, and it was also in the mind's eye of Congressman Ron Paul. Now, Basil, I'm thinking back to the show that we did, the two shows we did with Congressman Paul. Did you and he talk about other military involvement in the world, the United States, other military involvement at length? And Basil says no, but they had a very good conversation by phone prior to the show, and again, he's talked to him on occasion after the show, and they're very much of the mind that having 38,000 troops guarding the border between North Korea and South Korea is unnecessary, that it could be handled certainly by South Korean troops defending their own country. He thinks the United States, in fact, should not have a huge presence in other countries like Germany and Japan. That's so 1940-ish. Okay, yeah, you and he both agreed on that, I guess. Are there any other countries that he noted or that you noted? Yeah, Basil says that Congressman Paul went down a list of literally dozens upon dozens upon dozens of countries where the United States has not just a diplomatic presence but a military presence, and Basil and Congressman Paul absolutely of a mind that the United States presence, military presence, is very expensive. It doesn't set a good tone. Having a presence in Saudi Arabia, in fact, had a lot to do with the upsurge of a fellow by the name of Osama bin Laden, who orchestrated an attack on the World Trade Center. And Basil says that he doesn't believe any country should attack any other country. Basil is, as to not only his Christian background religiously, but his Buddhist background philosophically, he says there's no excuse for anybody committing an act of violence anywhere in the world, that there's no justification. But in retrospect, he thinks it's important to, let me make sure I get this right. It's important to look at reasons for things happening and not agreeing with anyone who perpetrates heinous acts of violence, but understanding what went through their mind in making the decision, and perhaps making some adjustments in our own behavior that takes the rationale out of their hands and makes it makes it less likely that they'll come to that decision. And in fact, Basil and I part ways on the killing of Osama bin Laden. I think that's should we talk about that a bit, Basil? Basil says fine. Okay. Basil believes that every effort should have been made to capture Osama bin Laden, that he's absolutely against going into another country and killing their citizens or killing someone who is living there, no matter who they are. But he does believe that we should have sent our special ops forces in there only to capture and only to bring to an international court of justice. And now, Basil, you don't have friends and friends of friends who died on September 11th when the World Trade Center was bombed, when the plane was commandeered and crashed into the Pentagon, when another plane which was headed for Washington D.C. ended up crashing in an open field in Pennsylvania. I do. So I think it's, you have to, I think, okay, yeah, Basil says he understands my position, he understands my feelings, but then he comes back with a rhetorical question. I think it's a rhetorical question. He asks me, did I support the invasion of Afghanistan and then the invasion of Iraq based on those incidents? And you know the answer to that, Basil. Yes, I believe that we should have gone into Afghanistan to capture bin Laden, to capture the people that had fought us, that had attacked us, but absolutely not on Iraq. You know that I was completely opposed. You didn't know me at the time, but you know from my conversations with you and with Kristen that I was absolutely opposed at the time to the invasion of Iraq, that everybody that looked at the facts as they presented themselves knew that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. He had nothing to do with al-Qaeda. In fact, he was quite opposed to al-Qaeda. We knew that we had Iraq, if serving no other purpose, that Iraq at least kept Iran in check. Iraq was Iran's only close neighbor opponent, or someone who could keep Iran in check and keep an eye on them, because, as we know, Iraq and Iran fought a war, and it was a war in which the Reagan administration and the Bush administration later on supported Iraq over Iran. Ended up giving Iraq somewhat are called weapons of mass destruction, and gave them the weapons that they ended up using on their own people, on the Kurds. And yes, I know. Yep. I've shown you pictures from the paper of a fellow by the name of Don Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein, and showing how we were friends with Iraq, and how we worked very hard to take sides with them against Iran, because we saw them as, I guess, our enemy's enemy. But you saw what happened from that. You see what happens all the time from countries invading other countries. You saw what happened to the Soviet Union, Basil. Basil says, no, he didn't see that, but he's, along with his religious studies, he has done some studying of history. He's had conversations with a close friend of Progressive Soup, Charlie Grabsky. He's had conversations with other folks that speak Catanese, that he knows that the Soviet Union, in fact, probably the final curtain call in the Soviet Union was caused in great part by their incursion into Afghanistan and their inability to beat a bunch of ragtag fighters, the Mujahideen, and the group led by Osama bin Laden. And Basil says, if the Russians couldn't do it, what in the world makes America think, and makes any administration think they can do anything more than go in, capture or kill? And of course Basil says capture is what he limits us to in his mind's eye. Basil, do you want to? We're getting off on this subject, but do you want to talk a little further about your show? What are your plans for your show? Okay, yep. Basil says, he makes a note that he's had Mitt Romney on for 2 shows, and he's been approached by a group from New Hampshire, a musical group, in fact, that has evolved out of this 2012 presidential race, and has named themselves, the group has named themselves Obama Romney. Basil says he's in strong and fruitful discussions to get the group Obama Romney on his show to sing some songs about their perspective is that there's not much difference between what they see as being ultimately the anointed candidate for the Republicans, and that being Mitt Romney, former governor of Massachusetts, and current President Barack Obama. See, you're getting me confused. Okay, so you correct yourself, so I don't have to correct you for you. Okay, Basil says, "Oops, you didn't learn that from Rick Perry, did you?" Basil says he did. He says, "Yep." He says he learned a Texas drawl from Rick Perry. He learned the importance of being able to say "oops," and he learned that evangelicals and fundamentalist Christians are okay. I'm going to say this. This is Basil speaking. Basil says he sees fundamentalists and evangelicals and religious conservatives being, for the most part. Now, okay, he wants to make clear that there are some evangelicals that are quite different from this group, that do in fact follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, Basil and my Lord and Savior, and do good, and don't believe in some of the things that other people that call themselves evangelicals, and certainly not folks that call themselves fundamentalists do. But he says former Governor Rick Perry taught him that they reinforced Basil's presumption, which he had held all along and feels very comfortable with, that there's a lot of folks in the Christian church that range from nutty to basically. Now you shouldn't use the word jihadist, because jihadist that's in fact an Arabic word. You probably should be more in tune with the word crusaders. Okay, yeah, Basil says crusaders, but they're just as bad as jihadists. They're no different from jihadists. They believe in going into other people's countries and furthering their religious beliefs through the barrel of a gun, or through bombing, through killing. And Basil says perhaps even worse than that on a national level in America, that a lot of these folks believe in things that are very non-Christian, things like wealth building, things like that Jesus, in their eyes, approves of people becoming wealthy, and in fact thinks wealth is a great thing, and wealth building. And Basil just says he I want to make sure I get this. Keep going. Yeah. Okay. Basil says that's a lot of malarkey, that Jesus was in fact an advocate for the poor, an advocate for regular folks, an advocate for a level playing field, an advocate for all children, all adults, all older people having food on the table, having shelter from the weather, and No, I think that's an old expression, chicken in every pot, Basil. No. Basil says, and every household needs to have a cat in every lap. Okay, yep. Fair enough. Now, Basil, one of the questions we've had from some folks about your show is that you identify in your credits, you identify your camera person. Well, let's go down the list. Obviously, Kristen Schoenfeld, who you and I call the Kristen. Kristen Schoenfeld is the producer of the show. You identify your audio person as being a character named Tweety, who I've never seen. But at any rate, you say Tweety's your audio person, and I'll take your word for it. You, of course, note me as being your co-host, and I appreciate that. Although I probably should also be credited with being your interpreter because of your language difficulties. Oh, okay. He says they're not his language difficulties. They're, in fact, the audience's language difficulties, and it's too darn bad, and that he has to make this kind of adjustment and have... Now, come... You asked me to be on your show. You asked me to be there as your co-host and to translate for you. He says, okay, yep, okay. He's a tolerant cat. But but back to the question about your group that helps with the show. You identify your camera person, in fact, as being some dumb, and I can't say it on television. People will have to watch the show and watch the credits at the end. But something about a snark hound. Now, I've looked high and low for anyone that's ever heard of a snark hound. Okay. Basil says, call him what you want, but a snark hound is somebody that's snarky, as the name implies. And the adjectives that he used to identify his camera guy, hey, a little bit of poetic license, he says. Okay, so at any rate, so you've got your cast that helps out with the show, including myself. And you've had the presidential candidates on so far. You've mentioned that you've got your line in to get the folks from the group you call Obama Romney in to perform on your show and do some singing about. Okay, Basil says he's going to join in and do some singing. In fact, if he can't get Obama Romney directly, he's going to ask me to play the guitar while Basil actually does the singing. He's going to take care of the lyrics, and I'll just have to be the flunky. No, come on now. Guitar players aren't flunkies. Guitars, that's a tough instrument. He says, not the way that I play it. Okay. All righty. Basil, we're going to have to actually cut it off there. This has been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, host. Guest Basil BuddhaCat, and see you next week. Good night.